There's also one quote that is unbelievable in this movie. This is a real quote. It says, I wrote it down. It goes, when you're slapped, you'll take it and like it.
So, that's what he does. I love that one. For the second time.
That is a banger.
New theme is film noir on 4Play for the next month. We've selected 4 film noir movies for you guys to watch along with across the entire breadth of film noir history. As we stated on previous episodes, we actually, it's hard to narrow down film noir into just 4 movies. Do we include neo-noir? But we went with kind of the classics, and we did a very broad overview, skipping about 20 years in between each individual film, so you get a very basic perspective on the entirety of the genre. And the films we picked, and the one we'll be doing first, will be The Maltese Falcon from 1941. Then we're going to do Orson Welles' Touch of Evil, then the classic Chinatown, and then the more modern LA Confidential, but still set, I believe, in the 1940s. And as for our new theme, we also have a new sponsor to go with that. That's right. If you guys have been around Last Free Nation, you know that Liquid IV has sponsored us in the past. Well, they're back. And if you guys love 4Play and love Last Free Nation, the best way to support us is to support our sponsors. So Liquid IV is great. It's a hydration supplement with lots of electrolytes and 5 essential vitamins, B3, B5, B6, B12, and vitamin C. I've been loving this. I use it for my intense cardio workouts. It's great if you have a hard night out. Yeah, Richard's hard cardio workouts. You'll get down eventually, Richard. You should start now. Why not? But
perfect time.
More applicable to you, Richard, might be, if you're having a big night out, you can slam one of these before you go to bed or when you wake up. And I have noticed when I do this, I do feel better. So it's been really great. I love this product. Everybody I know who's tried it has really enjoyed it. And you can get it in bulk nationwide at Costco, or you can get it 20% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code LFN at checkout. Real people, real flavor, real hydrating. Get your Liquid IV. It'll support us. All right.
By the way, as well as like the one that's the hydration one, like Monty, they also have one that like does the same but has an energy effect as well. So
it's like
caffeine. So they've got both sides covered on that.
And they have a new sugar-free version as well. So There you go. But lots of options. Really cool product. Really love it myself. I take it multiple times a week. I've been really enjoying it. Strawberry lemonade is great. As for the energy one, I like the yuzu pineapple. Really good stuff. So thank you, Liquid IV. And thanks to you guys for supporting us by purchasing Liquid IV. All right, guys, let's talk about film noir very broadly. So for those people who are not familiar with film noir, how would you categorize this genre of film that comes from crime novels from the earlier parts of the 20th century?
I'm waiting to see. I want to get Thorin's thoughts.
Oh, all right. I mean, to me, I would just say, I actually think this is why this genre of film almost doesn't exist now. And if it does, it's like an intentional, like harkening back to this age. Because to me, the thing that makes film noir interesting is it goes against all the traditional Hollywood conventions of things like the protagonist is always a virtuous man who is good and innocent, and whatever he does is probably right, and it'll all work out for him in the end. And if there's a woman, of course, she's innocent and she would never be any sort of a villain, and she must be the good person, and whoever's doing anything to her and anything she says, that must be accurate. Whereas like essentially all of these conventions are not just subverted, sometimes they're completely turned on their own head. Like obviously one of the elements I think is most popular about film noir is the idea that it's not just a detective story. Like spoiler, I'm not a huge fan of film noir. I actually do like detective stories a lot. I love stuff like Poirot and Sherlock Holmes. It's not that style of detective though. This is more like, I always joke, like things like Chinatown, if anything, I relate more to them as a journalist, because this is the sort of like the real world as opposed to the veneer of Hollywood. It's the idea that that, like, even when you're trying to do a case, maybe to be the person who actually solves the case, you have to get your hands dirty a bit. Maybe you have to beat someone up, kill them. Maybe you have to go around the law. You don't just go straight to the police that you have. Sometimes there is never going to be through the system a satisfying result. Maybe actually a gunfight's needed. Maybe in the end, the bad guy even gets away and you either just fail completely or you just get some sort of like shit moral victory. And it's like, in the end, you couldn't beat the system. To me, the noir part, that's the key part. It's that there's this darker undertone to it. And the world you're in, this is why it's funny because I don't know anything about the actual historical time period of LA, but from these movies, it paints like a very interesting picture that it is sort of still like an American frontier in some ways. And there is all this crime elements mixed with burgeoning police forces, mixed with, by the way, this will definitely tie in when we talk about Touch of Evil, mixed with the fact that you actually are in like a brand new country, basically, that was bloody Mexico not that long ago at this point in time. And so you have all these, so to me, I would say these are like the themes that I see like woven together. I'm not trying to be too specific there, but I think that's the part that people will misunderstand. And we're going to get into it on this particular one about Humphrey Bogart and Maltese Falcon is these would be quite shocking topics in a movie if you actually were in like 1950. Like, as I say, this is the era of like pretty straightforward, you know, sort of pulp and stuff like fucking what I mean, people don't know, like Doc Savage and stuff, and just things where like the leading guy's always the hero, and of course the popular actors always billed as like the cool protagonist guy who saves the day, whereas that's essentially none of these film noir like that. None of them are. In fact, they all carry the undertone, if anything, of sort of like the world is dark and you just have to sort of do what you can is the vibe, right?
Yeah, and you know what's great about it is it's the reason it's my favorite genre of movie is because first of all visually it's informed by what you would consider, you know, landmark cinema. It's German expressionism. It's light, it's shape, it's form. You know, you think about The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the 1920s horror movie, you know, and how that's shot and how it has this style that's still incredible to look at 100 years later. Film noir looks good. And that's the sort of that's the artistry with it. Like, these movies are beautiful to look at. The way that they're shot, the way that they're lit, that is a deliberate component of a film noir.
Yes.
But the subject matters are really ugly and unpleasant. And that's because it's informed by, you know, when hard-boiled crime novels got super popular during the Great Depression in America, because obviously that would, of course, become a popular type of literature right then, you know, people who just get it done, people who just knuckle down, times are hard, but, you know, the protagonist somehow just battles through as best that they can. That was the spirit of the era. And so these hard-boiled novels that sort of came through, once they started becoming the touchstone for the narratives in film noir, you have this like incredible juxtaposition of the beauty of cinema as a visual medium with these sprawling stories that were all informed by literature. And so, I mean, you know, the overall sort of canon of the classic era of film noir, which is essentially the Maltese Falcon, isn't the first by any stretch of the imagination, but it's the one that popularizes it and becomes the blueprint, the template for all go-to noir
at this point, right?
Exactly. It's the most known film noir there is. It's the launch pad for anyone who wants to get into the genre. And then it runs up to 1958's Touch of Evil, really. Orson Welles came in and sort of killed the genre for a few years because with that type of story, he really showed there was only, where can you go after that? And you sort of have to wait until the 60s again. I want to say 67, like Point Blank with Lee Marvin. It's kind of like a noir. So it's an amazing genre that takes, like I say, these sprawling stories, this realist approach to the world as being viewed as America is broken and the protagonist is beset upon from all sides. Nobody can trust anybody else, and yet somehow we have to muddle through and come to a satisfying, you know, resolution.
And often they are unsatisfying resolutions, as Thorin
Absolutely.
said. I mean, you're basically fighting against a system that is too powerful for you, and even if you're ethically correct, you lose. I mean, I understand why you love this genre, Richard Lewis. This is basically your life as an investigative journalist.
It sounds like insane and sort of pretentious, I suppose, but like, I was thinking about this a lot when I was watching the movies and making my notes, and I was like, you know what? I remember watching this as a kid, and I remember wanting to be that guy, but not because he gets the girl or not because he's tough and he can win the fight, but because he very often these guys stand for something. I think that's another like key component. Generally, and as we'll talk about with Sam Spade, you don't have to be a likable guy. Like Sam Spade's not a likable guy. He's not a nice dude, but he stands for something. And it's his code, and he won't change it for anybody.
Well,
and so, fuck yeah, this obviously affected me much deeper in a way than I'd ever sort of anticipated. Because Sunday afternoon, I used to love, we'd have Sunday dinner, best dinner of the week, and then these would be on BBC Two or something, and I would just sit there and watch these movies. And yeah, I think it had a profound effect on my developing brain, actually.
It's also that a key aspect of film noir is that this is not for people with TikTok attention spans. There are multiple motives that you have to pay attention to for people. It's a lot of different narratives. You're slowly kind of uncovering the truth. You, as a viewer, are undergoing the central character's detective process on understanding what is going on. Everybody's lying at some point in time. You have the classic femme fatale, women pretending to be in distress, but actually being master manipulators, which is a very key component of
sometimes
the
even
Maltese
being
Falcon.
the villain, like you say. Sometimes they are, they're not even just like the side piece. They actually are the villain sometimes.
Yeah. And so you really do have to pay attention. And it's not a lot of quick edits. Like a lot of the direction, especially on these first two movies that you're going to see, is really long shots. Lots of dialogue. There's some action interspersed, but it's usually just like somebody shooting somebody or the car exploding, like we'll talk about in Touch of Evil. But 95% of the movie is just talking about a murder or talking about a crime that's happened, and these characters interacting with each other and going through the evidence in the process of discovery. Now, all film noir is based off of crime. It is a crime genre. A lot of it comes from novelists, as you were saying, Richard, the hard-boiled crime novelists of the era. And, these are people like Dashiell Hammett, who wrote the original Maltese Falcon. He also wrote The Glass Key, which became a famous film noir movie. Or Raymond Chandler, who wrote The Big Sleep. That he had a bunch of his novels that were then converted into films as well. So most of these come from books. Now, the thing is that at least in the 30s and 40s and early 50s, a key thing to understand about film noir was that the entire movie industry was bound by something called the Hays Code at the time. And this is really important to know because you will see a big difference in subject matter between the Maltese Falcon and the rest of the movies that we do, because Touch of Evil came in kind of as the Hays Code was crumbling. And so it allowed it to touch features or to touch subjects like drug use and like strippers and prostitution, which were completely unable to be discussed on screen because Hollywood was self-censoring at the time.
It's comparable, if people know, to why comic books couldn't ever have been what they are now in like the Alan Moore world back then, because there used to be something called the Comics Code that meant you couldn't show things like this, like you couldn't show anything essentially edgy. And it wasn't until that was taken away, funnily enough, by like pioneering work, that comics became this genre where you could do all sorts of dark things. So it's a similar concept, Monty. Like, again, people don't know, but they were sort of ring fenced in for years and years. So when you can finally break out, you can imagine you can go way deeper.
Yeah. And also, like, this is going to be really important to the rest of our discussions of film noir, because it's also the reason why our last movie, LA Confidential, is set in the 40s, but has things like drugs and prostitution in it, which is unusual, which is why it was kind of a love letter to the 40s style of film noir.
It's basically like if Quentin Tarantino made a film noir movie, that one. That's how I would say if you never watched it, it's good.
Right. It's just, it can be a little unusual to see film noir set in that era with these themes, because it wasn't possible to do it in the era with these themes at the time. So to explain what the Hays Code was, is that it was not mandated by the US government. It was a voluntary program that the studios agreed to because they were in trouble with the individual states. So basically in the 20s, there were some murders and rape scandals in Hollywood. A lot of people who took moral objection to this. Then the states started instituting decency laws. And so there was a potential that certain states would allow certain movies and other states wouldn't, or the studios would have lawsuits. So the studios voluntarily agreed to this code that says, like, there was like don'ts and be carefuls that were proposed in the late 20s. And this kind of went into effect in the early to mid 1930s. But like, you couldn't have pointed profanity, including God, Lord, Jesus, and Christ, hell, SOB, damn.
Yeah.
You couldn't have licentious or suggestive nudity. You couldn't have illegal traffic in drugs. Any inference of sex perversion, which means you can't show gay people, by the way. That's what that means. White slavery, miscegenation, which is interracial relationships, sex, hygiene, or venereal diseases, scenes of actual childbirth, in fact or in silhouette, children's sex origins, ridicule of the clergy, or willful offense to any nation, race, or creed. And then they have a bunch that were, you should be careful of, like the use of firearms, arson, theft, a bunch of crimes. So what this actually meant was that a lot of the crime books, so for example, The Big Sleep is very different in the book. I've read the book compared to the film because it deals with sex and drugs. So basically this means that a lot of the source material had to be really radically adapted during this time period. And why this eventually fell off is because the Motion Picture Association of America, you had to do these things to get their seal of approval, but foreign films didn't have to abide by these rules. Then in the 50s, there started to be some really sexy foreign films. And also with the rise of television, there were very strict rules from the government about what could be shown on television. And so to get people to go to the movie theaters, the studios had to offer a different and kind of more edgy experience. And so they ended up dropping this eventually. But it was this hilarious moral code that was going on. And by the time Touch of Evil comes out, as you'll see, there's a lot more racy material.
Orson Welles deliberately swung for the fences. It was like a classic Orson Welles fuck you, that movie. It's great.
So this is all to say that the Maltese Falcon is not particularly affected by this code because the core story is not about prostitution and drugs. It's about a MacGuffin of this Falcon that all the characters are trying to steal effectively. But you should just be aware in this genre that many other films are affected by this, and it does have this massive, massive impact on the movies that were made and the movies that were made later, and why you're going to see none of the really gritty stuff in the 1940s.
Yeah, and there's subtext as well in a lot of these films that they used as a practical workaround. So,
I mean, even this one, they basically imply he's fucking her, but without saying it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they sort of, it's just like taken for granted, isn't it?
And don't forget as well, Joel Cairo, Peter Lorre's character. Sam Spade relishes punching him in the face because he has a perfumed handkerchief. Ooh. It's there. But they work with what they had to do, and Monty's right in the sense that probably one of the reasons why this was like a hugely popular movie, even though it was set up to fail for a number of reasons we'll get into by the studio, is because it doesn't get into any of that, salacious license, all of that nonsense. It's not there in the story. It has the ultimate cinematic MacGuffin introduced in a Star Wars-esque text crawl at the start of the fucking film. I fucking love this movie, dude.
Explain what a MacGuffin is for people who don't know.
Yeah, so the MacGuffin, I always forget the name of the dude who came up with it. It's often wrongly attributed to Hitchcock. It was another guy, but Hitchcock popularized the term. Basically, a MacGuffin is something in a movie that everyone has a relationship to. They want it, they desire it, whatever it is, and that's what drives the story forward. And of course, in this, it is the titular Maltese Falcon. I even wrote it down. The pre-crawl is in 1539, the Knights Templars of Malta paid tribute to King Charles V of Spain by sending him a golden falcon encrusted from beak to claw in rarest jewels. But pirates seized the galley carrying this priceless token, and the fate of the Maltese Falcon remains a mystery to this day. So, in other words, there's this fucking ultra mega statue worth fucking fortune out there. It turns out, even though the story starts out having nothing to do with it, we end up getting embroiled in the search for the Maltese Falcon, and it has a direct impact on our protagonist's life. So yeah, that's a MacGuffin.
So this is actually a very easy film to summarize because the plot is very simple. What is not simple is the way that you arrive at the conclusions and the conversations that occurred. So as Richard said, there are a bunch of characters looking for the Maltese Falcon. Now, the characters looking for the Maltese Falcon is not Humphrey Bogart, who is the private investigator, the private detective at the start of the film. He gets a damsel in distress rolling up to him in his partner's office. She gives a sob story that they don't believe, but she pays them enough for them to not care, for them to tail a guy. Now, his partner, so Humphrey Bogart's character's named Sam Spade, his partner, Miles Archer, gets shot while he's tailing this guy. That starts a police investigation, and then slowly over time, more and more characters start getting introduced because the woman is actually looking for the Maltese Falcon. Her partner, who was actually the one being tailed, she lied and was trying to scare him so she could get all of the money, it turns out, in the very end. He also gets killed, and then by another character that comes up in this movie, and basically it's like, where is the Maltese Falcon? Who has it at any given point in time? When is it going to show up? It turns out it comes in on a ship from Hong Kong, and they shoot the guy who's delivering it, and he collapses inside Sam Spade's office. So Sam Spade gets the Maltese Falcon, then he hides it in a locker, and then basically has a moment where everybody's in his apartment, and he's trying to get the money out of them to buy it. They open it up, and it turns out it's actually a fake, so nobody gets the Maltese Falcon, and then the characters leave in pursuit of it at the very end, and ostensibly get arrested off screen, if we're to believe what occurs. So that is the very, very simple summary of this film. It is not a complicated plot, like I said, but there is a lot of dialogue and wonderful characters in this as each kind of person is introduced to Sam Spade, and he's trying to figure out their motivations and what the hell is actually going on here, because everyone is lying to him.
By the way, I actually do think the premise is a very good premise. Like, if people don't know the actual history of, like, the Knights Templar, that's actually a way better origin story for an insanely valuable, like, item than, like, for example, any of the Indiana Jones movies, where it's all some sort of, like, blurring of, like, myth with history, with, like, if you go back far
I love
enough,
that about Indiana Jones, but okay.
Instead, the difference is this is an actual item that, like, could exist in real life. If people don't know, the Knights Templar, part of the reason why, like, the King of France turned on them was the notion was they'd made so much money through their trade routes and through, like, potentially what do you call it, like jewels and things they'd uncovered in different sites around the world, that essentially, like, they were even like the envy of kings and royal houses, etc. So the idea that, like, they're doing this to, like, placate a king, that makes perfect sense. That's
it does have a little essence in reality as well, because it was a symbol. The Maltese people did used to send a falcon to the King of Spain sort of annually as a gesture, but it was a real life bird, and then so they took that aspect, and then, as you say, because of the opulence, the known established historical opulence of the Knights Templar and their huge coffers, essentially, they just put a twist on it that it was this artifact. So.
And the
I even think as well, the clever thing as well in this story is the actual outcome, like Monty says, that it isn't actually the real Falcon and that's not the real one. That's even a clever angle, because there's another plausible reason why this scenario is just a bunch of people searching in one area. It's not like some worldwide thing, because the idea is it's been covered in this enamel, so anyone who's had it in the last few generations doesn't even know it's this incredibly valuable thing, which is actually a metaphor for the film, like Monty's getting to. Because essentially what's funny is when you first watch this film, I'm actually shocked this film was so, like, popular and so critically acclaimed, because I actually thought when I rewatched it again, like, fuck, especially if you haven't seen these movies before, how would you even get into the first, like, half an hour? You just essentially be like, what is this film? Like, who is he? What's going on? And what's even the motivation, essentially, that, like, acting line? Because what it essentially tries to do, Monty, is this reminds me of the cosmic horror thing, where one of the effective things in cosmic horror is if you, the viewer, feel disorientated and don't have all the information and aren't quite sure. Essentially, this whole movie, like you say, every person who you meet, you never initially know who they are, sometimes even their name. You definitely don't know their motivations. Whatever they initially present as, often they aren't, and there's some, like, subtle, like, extra ulterior motive, or they're secretly already working with this other person. And essentially, actually, like, really the movie is you're like Sam Spade, you're a guy like, what am I doing here? Who is that? Like, why do I care about this? Okay, I've got this one little thread I can sort of pull on, but he himself doesn't know for the majority of the movie what's going on. Like, in fact, I would say a core dynamic of this movie that's quite unique is, like you say, every character except Sam Spade essentially is lying at some point in the movie, if not all the time. And it's actually more like they all operate how you actually would if you were searching for, like, the ultimate jewel MacGuffin thing worth bazillions, which is you wouldn't just try to find it. What you're guarding is the information about what is it, where is it, who did it cut. And so because everyone's doing that, like, it's only actually at the end of each person's story you even know the bloody details, like the why, what, when, where, the 5 W's, right? So actually that aspect, I think, is what makes the movie quite unique. I'll say, just cards on the table, I'm not actually a big fan of this movie, even though it is the go to like the fucking tabula rasa of film noir. I actually do prefer stuff like The Big Sleep, etc. I think this one actually does get a bit muddied in the plot sometimes, and a lot of it, by the way, is just people. It's just dialogue. It's just people talking. So if you essentially stick with it, if in the first half an hour you have a problem with it, because it will actually clear up. Like you will understand what happened. It's just that the first part, I actually think almost makes you think, is this ever going to actually resolve it? This is fucking. I'm just hearing names and bloody details and people off camera at the moment, you know.
Well, I got the Roger Ebert review, right?
Did he give it a good one?
Yeah, well, of course, it's 4 stars. But he gives a summary of the movie that it might be one of his best summaries ever. Okay. He said the movie is essentially a series of conversations punctuated by brief violent interludes. It's all style. It isn't violence or chases, but the way the actors look, move, speak, and embody their characters. Under the style is attitude. Hard men in a hard season, in a society emerging from depression and heading for war, and they are motivated by greed and capable of murder. And for an hourly fee, Sam Spade will negotiate this terrain. And that is the movie. It is a series of dialogue. I mean, this was a budget film. They'd already tried to adapt this, but Warner Brothers had tried to adapt this book 2 times. And it had failed commercially. And this had a budget of, which for the time is even low, it was $375,000. You know, and they put in a John Huston. This is his directorial debut.
It's his first movie, isn't it?
I know,
He's got a lot of famous movies after this, but yeah,
like it's fucking insane. This is his starting point. You know, so this is what I mean about it being set up to fail. Humphrey Bogart was a B-list actor at this point. It's easy to forget. He just played tough guys in movies. He was not a star. This made him a star. There's no Casablanca without this film.
Right, and not only that, but Casablanca was made the next year and also had Sidney Greenstreet and Peter Lorre. And this was also Sidney Greenstreet's first movie, which is also crazy.
And he's the archetypal fat, greedy bastard, all throughout the 40s, you know, and 50s. I mean, he's even parodied in The Simpsons. You remember that that character who goes, "Oh, I shouldn't have told him about my client's secret offshore bank account." You know, that's
the way he does also nail this role, like you say. Like he is exactly the prototype of exactly the sort of like business type guy who's involved with the film noir. He does a mega job in this movie as well.
You can also tell how out of hand the obesity crisis has got, because he's called the fat man behind the scenes. And then Sam Spade says on the phone, "You can't miss him. He's 300 pounds.
Casper Gutman. You can't miss Gutman. He must weigh 300 pounds.
That ain't even all bad this day and age.
I was actually going to mention that. And not only that, what was his name? Gut Man.
Yeah, Gut Man. Yeah. Yeah, it's fucking brilliant. But look, so let's I don't know where you want to begin, because like do you want to Bogart? Do we start there?
By the way, here's one thing I'll say at the beginning, right? One thing I've always said about this era of movies, like in the 50s, etc., that I think's mega underrated, the 40s and 50s, is I always tell people, right, there is literally like a cast of people who are all like Hall of Fame equivalent, like actors. This is the era essentially where the gap between the star actor and the random guy in the scene is the biggest ever in history. Like, difference is, even what you think are bad movies in the 90s, essentially it's like everyone knows the meta of the game, as it were. People know the basic concepts of what you do and what they go for. Back in this era, normal people don't. Like, you can tell the stars are just doing their own shit, or they're all like working with these revolutionary, Stanislavski methods and stuff. Because in this era, people like Bogart, every scene he's in, he looks like a real person. The rest of them may as well be like cardboard puppets or something. Like, what do you mean? Whatever. Like, they're all doing that shit, like the 40s and 50s thing. He's actually doing real acting. Like, for me, in this movie, like, Fox steal the scene. He is the scene every time he's in it. Like, everyone else is just like some two-dimensional character compared to him for me.
Yeah, I'm trying to think who it was, by the way. It was one of the writers. I always forget if it was Dashiell Hammett or whatever. But it was either the Dashiell Hammett or the Raymond Chandler. I can't remember which one said it, but they said about Bogart, all he has to do to dominate a scene is enter it. And that's just the fucking truth of this movie. You know, in a movie that is dialogue heavy, in a movie that's about interactions, Bogart is just on fire here. It's like so hard to think about this dude being like a henchman instead of a leading man. Yeah. Because he gets like he doesn't, when you get like a one-liner in a movie and some people like will really like slow down the delivery because they want it to like, hang there. He just rifles through his one-liners.
He has like a machine gun.
Yeah, blink and you will miss them. And then he
Oh,
has some
the way this movie has
unreal lines
so
in this
many
movie.
good quotables, doesn't it? It has so many banger lines. This movie does. It's such good. It's good.
The one he says to the chick at the end. Where is it? I wrote it down. I hope they don't hang you by that sweet neck of yours, but if they do hang you, I will always remember you.
If you get a good break, you'll be out of Tehachapi in 20 years, and you can come back to me then. I hope they don't hang you, precious, for that sweet neck.
It's so fucking good. Like, I mean, you
and
know,
as you said, the Fat Man guy has some mega lines too. He has some
yeah.
bangers.
Absolutely. Even like when he tries to just pocket $1,000 at the end, just to see if he'll notice, just to prove. So I mean, look, like Bogart is like revelatory in this. Like he will hold your attention. There's like one of the fascinating components about the character that I think he really delivers well is, first of all, it's, you know, implied that he doesn't even like his partner. When his partner's shot and he gets the news.
Oh, there's another thing.
He's
with that
fucking his partner's wife.
They just imply that he's fucking his wife, but they have to do it in the softest possible way, don't they? Because I remember watching that part and also thinking, dude, a modern viewer's not going to get, they're being too subtle with that maybe. Like, until the end, you're not going to realize, because you know, when she comes to him initially, you're just thinking like, who's this character they haven't introduced? And it's like implied, obviously, that, well, you know, you might have said that if he was dead, we could stay a fuck or whatever. Like, that's almost the dialogue, except obviously without that key part.
Yeah, and he can't stand it. He says, so he gets the news. He's off camera, doesn't react. He immediately calls his secretary and says, yeah, you know, Miles has been shot. Yeah, dead. Just do me a favor and keep his widow away from me, right? And then puts the phone down and like goes back to bed or some shit. I don't even know. And then like he goes in and the widow is there. And you're like, oh, it's just because of the emotion. He's a hard. And then she comes in and immediately is throwing herself at him and talking about a fucking insurance policy. And, you know, she asks him, did you do it? And he's like, get off me, you. It's just like, wow, this guy's a piece of shit. This guy is a legendary piece of shit.
Ha! You killed my husband, Sam. Be kind to me.
I just love too how when somebody, I think it's Mary Astor's character, asks him about Miles's death, and he just says, "Oh yeah, don't worry about it. He had no kids and a wife who didn't love him."
Yeah, literally. Yeah, he had no kids and a wife who didn't love him, but a $10,000 life insurance policy, so it's all gonna work out. And it's just like, holy shit, this guy's Sam Spade is fucking great. Like the character is like pitch perfect, and it just fit. You know, Bogart just fits into it like a glove. Like he was always destined to play this role. And as I said, the delivery of the dialogue, the fact that it's really playful with how it kind of sets him up, because he's not a big strong guy, but he's a tough guy. But when the police are interrogating him, he gets slapped around. He gets drugged and kicked.
He gets punched in the most hilarious way ever by that one main cop. It's like he does like some god like Bruce Lee, like 1-inch punch or something that just gets him right in his neck, like. And then it's like, hold me back, motherfucker.
That
chucked me up, that punch. That did. That was funny as fuck.
That's one of the, you know, there's a lot of like modern cinematic characters. Like, you know, you probably don't even have John McClane in Die Hard if you don't have this iteration of Sam Spade and the Maltese Falcon. Like, no joke, because this is the archetype of a guy who's just tough. You just can't break him. You can hurt him, you can render him unconscious, but as soon as he's awake, he's coming at you, and you better deal with it. You know what I mean? It's just like he will just not be worn down by the system, despite not being
he even has that
superhuman, you know?
You know that like weird soliloquy he gives to like the cops or whatever, where it's like, or is it actually the fat guy, where he sort of says something weird? Like, it's like the weirdest reverse psychology ever, where it's sort of like, yeah, well, you could fuck me up, but then you'll have to kill me as well. And then they're like, oh shit, he's got us there, he's checkmated us. That does come off a bit weird, like, just kill him then, what? Like, that is one of the weird, because it's like you say though, Richard, his whole thing's like, he'll just go to the end, isn't it? Like, you can't stop him, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. So it is brilliant. I mean, like, this is, you know, you have to be so grateful that John Huston and Humphrey Bogart found each other. I mean, obviously, Humphrey Bogart did die pretty young. He was like 57 or whatever it was from esophageal cancer, which was brought on by heavy smoking and heavy drinking, which John Huston undoubtedly facilitated because they were very much kindred spirit. Yeah. But, look, it's so good they found each other because Huston was, John Huston, he is a guy who likes to party. He's a guy who likes to drink. He's a guy who understands, what it is to be that traditional, man of the era. And in Bogart, when no one else could see a leading man, he saw a leading man. In fact, actually, I got this down. Bogart wasn't the original choice. It was George Raft.
Oh, okay.
He was like, a star at the time, did a bunch of, decent 40s movies. But George Raft sort of turned it down because, I think a lot of people thought it was going to be box office poison. And particularly first-time director, first-time actors. And so Huston was, almost instrumental in the casting of Bogart, taking up the leading role. This is like just a masterclass of sort of when a director and an actor come together and they really understand the assignment.
And if you like this pairing, there's a bunch of banger movies that they made together, but like I'm a huge fan of Treasure of the Sierra Madre, which is a Western directed by John Huston, starring Humphrey Bogart. You guys might have heard the line like, badges, we don't need no stinking badges. That's where that line comes from, very famous. And then he did The African Queen, which is like an adventure movie with Bogart and Katharine Hepburn that is also really good. But John Huston just had an immense legacy of like super good movies. You guys might have seen The Unforgiven, which is probably one of the most famous Westerns of all time. He directed one of my favorite films ever, actually, which nobody's seen, which is called The Man Who Would Be King, which is
all-time great Sean Connery film.
Fucking love that movie. So it's Michael Caine and Sean Connery, who basically are these two British explorers who discover this like untouched kingdom that thinks they're gods, and so it's about them trying to pretend sort of they are gods.
Smith going to the New World sort of thing, where you can sort of piggyback on their mythos. Yeah.
So I'm just a huge fan of John Huston and his work, and he's just done so many movies, and many of them were with the same actors, and especially Humphrey Bogart. And the fun thing is you get to see Humphrey Bogart in very different genres. It's not just film noir. It's like the action movie, and it's the Western, and it's all just great. It's all wonderful.
Yeah. By the way, one thing I really do like about this movie, though, which is another classic trope, except the joke is here, they laid on so thick. There's no subtlety to the like corruption in this movie, though, because like, first of all, the actual main character, Sam Spade, and if people don't know, the reason that name, even if you're not familiar with it, will sound familiar, is because the joke is that is just the archetypal like fucking gumshoe guy in a film noir. They may as well all be called Sam Spade, is the joke. Like, and this is the ultimate version of it, because as you say, like, it is presented as basically until the very end of the movie, where you find out how Humphrey Bogart sort of comes good, and in the end he even gives a speech how he is sort of loyal to his partner and stuff. Aside from that, they actually give the vibe the whole movie that maybe he's also just out for himself, and maybe he is just going to try and get as much money as he can, and maybe he just wants to get the Falcon and be the one who gets the money and sort of not be the one betrayed by the others.
There's me.
That's wonderful, sir, wonderful. I do like a man who tells you right after he's looking out for himself. Don't we all? I don't trust a man who says he's not.
Uh-huh.
Because essentially the whole movie is everyone trying to double cross each other. Like, the joke I would give is, to a modern viewer, if you haven't watched this film, you know the opening scene that everyone loves from The Dark Knight, where the Joker pulls off that genius robbery. And the reason it's genius is at every stage, it just relies on someone else with petty greed to betray the person before him. And at the end, the Joker just pulls the final trigger and then he wins, because you've all killed each other who did the crime. And at the end, essentially that's what everyone in this movie is trying to do. They're all trying to keep all the information as long as possible, and then the last second they're going to fuck you over, and they're not going to give you the money they promised, or they're going to turn you over to be the fall guy. So there's that whole angle, right? And they keep you guessing in the movie, is Bogart going to do that at the end? But simultaneous to that is another classic trope that they put really thick, which is the femme fatale. Because here's the thing, I get it, if you'd never seen a femme fatale, this would be it'd be throwing you off. You'd be all over the place like, whoa, what's going on? It would be really cool. Problem is, when you know it though, it's absurd, because she she's just vocalizing all the fucked up shit she's doing. Like, she's just openly saying, like, every time, like, it's like this, right? Oh, well, you lied to me like this. Maybe I did lie, and maybe what I said wasn't true. But in the end, can you really hold it against this little face? And he's sort of like, ah, damn yeah. And it's like, that's just that, like, 50 times over. Like, she's just constantly, like, the joke is, she's, like, by the way, she's a good example of how good an actor Humphrey Bogart is. She's just average as fuck, mate. This actress is mid as fuck in all regards. Like, she's not some great actress with great depth. In fact, she is just delivering lines like she's reading them. It really is like, oh, no, I guess I did lie to you, and I probably shouldn't have. I guess I can't be trusted. I'm a bad person. You should definitely not trust. And then he's like, well, I'll be the judge of that, Toots. You know, like, it's like ridiculous. Like, it's so thick how they lay it on. But in a way, you know, I even like that aspect, because it's like, you are just, it does keep you off kilter a little bit, because you are just thinking, like, why the fuck would they admit, like, and essentially, by the way, all the things she admits are all true. Like, she is just actually fucking, like, it actually does turn out in the end, her role, I bet anyone who's never seen this film, you'll be shocked by what her role is at the end of the film. Like, there's no way you'll guess it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, her performance was definitely informed by the fact she started in the, you know, silent film era. Like, no doubt about it. You know,
she's good looking. I can see that. Yeah,
which you need that, and you know, like, yes. all joking aside, you know, you do need a femme fatale to be seductive often, you know, and it wouldn't be very plausible if, you know, a hot-blooded red, you know, alpha male like Sam Spade, you know, who can get any woman he wants. You know, she has to be there. But yeah, her performance is definitely a downside in it. I think what's super interesting is, like, Sam Spade is like, her shit doesn't really work on him. Like, after the initial deception,
yes,
he literally tells her, like, what her motivations are, even if she's kind of like trying to lie with.
Well, he also tells her, you know, he also tells her just a straight cutter bullshit, and he's like, you know, exactly. your damsel in distress act doesn't work.
I mean, by the way, that's also something, to be fair, that the Sam Spade character is doing to everyone, though. Like, essentially, what they also do, his real superpower is he's like some, like, Sherlock Holmes level student of human behavior, where he can do that thing where, you know, you walk in and you go, oh, raining on 4th Avenue, was it? And you go, what do you mean? And they go, oh, didn't you see the speck of, like, the rain here? And then there's some mustard, which meant you had a hot dog from the cart. He does that shit all the time, too. Like, essentially, not just to her, he also just verbalizes constantly, like, well, you seem like the sort of person who does it. It's why when he meets the fat man, it's quite a cool dynamic, because the fat guy's also really good at that. Like, his whole shit is sort of, like, cynically reading what sort of, even keeps saying it, you know, oh, you're the sort of man who'd, you know, ask this way. Well, I don't like that sort of person because they're not trustworthy. It's like, they're all really interesting, like, students of human behavior, as it were, because that is like another dynamic, that he does this to both the woman and all the criminal, but he just tells them all the time what they're doing, basically. He's just reading them like a god, isn't he?
Peter Lorre, because, you know, the real try.
Just to mention before I forget, there's also one quote that is unbelievable in this movie. This is a real quote. It says, I wrote it down, it goes, when you're slapped, you'll take it and like it.
That's what he does.
I love that one.
Peter Lorre for the second time.
That is a banger.
This is the second time that you've laid hands on me. When you're slapped, you'll take it and like it.
And also, by the way, I'll tell you one moment that did make me laugh, even though I think it's unintentional. You know, when the Peter Lorre guy comes along with the gun and he knocks him out and he says all that stuff, he then hands the gun back and the guy immediately just sticks him up again. Like, right, I want all stuff. Like,
that's what I was just going to bring up. That's my favorite scene.
I know, it's so stupid.
It's my favorite scene in the movie.
He immediately hands him.
It's so good. What are you talking about?
He goes, no, we'll search her office, and he just laughs and goes, I'm not going to stop you. He's just bad him. It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Please clasp your hands together at the back of your neck. I intend to search your offices.
Well, sure. Go ahead. I won't stop you.
I mean, Peter Lorre, like, where this movie utterly is a triumph is in the casting. Like, everybody
it was very well cast,
perfect for the character. You know, Mary Astor's the worst of it, really, and she's fine. You know,
she's okay.
But Peter Lorre is fucking great.
Yes,
Joel Cairo in it. It's crazy. You know, not really a lot of screen time when you think about it. It's kind of like, you know, one of the underlings, you know, working for the fat man. But he is the master in this era of that sweaty, greasy, nervous, anti-charm. You know, where it's like he just gives you the creeps to like look at him.
There's something wrong the second you see him, don't you?
Voice where he talks like
That's mad creepy,
yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, and he's on pitch perfect form here as Joel Cairo, and the interplay between him and Bogart's great. You know, the contrast, and as I said, when it comes to a head in that scene. Because Sam Spade can beat up a Joel Cairo all day long, unarmed, armed. It doesn't matter. You're in his world if you're Joel Cairo. But so he is just wailing on Peter Lorre. That's when he does the whole, when you're slapped, you'll take it and you'll like it. It's just fucking brilliant.
But in general, low key, because that character, like you say, is like the ultimate. Like they even set him up so you're not really sure what his like origins are. Is he Egyptian? He could be from anywhere. That's the point. Is essentially it's just like back in the day. It's some strange Oriental figure, basically, is the premise back in this era. And by the way, he does completely treat that character like an absolute bitch. Like the one where he just like, beats him up and then just makes him like go like, "No, we were just playing" or whatever. Like,
exactly. At one point, he's about to get arrested for beating him up, and he's got visible marks. And he's going, "Why didn't you ask him? He'll tell you he fell down on the carpet."
Exactly.
And he's going, "Yes, that's right, officer."
I know, it's so good. Brilliant. He has mad Renfield energy, that guy, doesn't he? I know, it's so
100%.
Supplicant.
That cut on his head, how did that get there?
Ask him. Maybe he cut himself shaving.
The cut? No. When we pretended to be struggling for the gun, I fell over the carpet. I fell.
Horse fetish.
As I said, the cast in this is brilliant, and you're like, holy shit, Bogart's so good. Then Laurie comes in, and you're like, holy shit, Laurie's so good. And then when you finally get the Sidney Greenstreet character,
so good.
He if it wasn't for Bogart, we're just talking about this dude. This performance is unbelievable.
I just love, and apparently it was. It was quite difficult to do some of those scenes. I was reading up on this, and the scenes that take place in Sidney Greenstreet's Gutman's apartment between Bogart and Greenstreet they had rehearsed for days, and they did a lot of very complex long shots in that. And it was the scene, the first scene, and then the scene where he gets drugged. He gets like roofied by like in his drink that's given to him by Greenstreet. And it apparently was like quite difficult to rehearse and shoot that scene. And especially with film noir, you have to have good actors because the shots are often so long that there's no way you can save it with editing. And you kind of just have to have people who are very well rehearsed and memorized within those takes. And to me, just the wittiness of some of these conversations and the direction that goes on. And you'll see this in Touch of Evil as well, when they do shots of Orson Welles, but both Sidney Greenstreet and Orson Welles, like the low camera angle where it's like looking up from their belly, is just like, it's so sinister a lot of the time, the camera angles, where it's just like kind of deeply uncomfortable to look at these guys, and they're like accentuating their fatness in many ways and making them seem kind of extra seedy and disgusting. But it's really good. And Sidney Greenstreet is just, he's immense in this movie.
Well, he was a sort of classically trained actor who refused to do the movies for years.
I mean, I think he was 61, and this was his first movie.
And this is why, it's like he's tailor-made for noir. It's like it's Shakespearean dialogue. It's like you say, it's long takes, long conversation.
This movie could easily just be a play,
stage play. Yeah, totally.
Easily.
I mean, there is no. You will notice that the way that it's edited, you don't see anyone get in a car and go to a place. You don't see anyone, get in a plane and fly. Like he goes from coast to coast, right? Like at one point, like he moves state at least in this movie because he has to go up to the big city. And so, but there's none of that there. There's no travel. There's no sense of that. Not even a map like in Indiana Jones, right? There's none of that. It's just, I'm in a room now talking to these guys. Let's do it. And that's what I mean. It's like you could easily, I'm sure it's been done as a stage play. But yeah, I mean, Sidney Greenstreet's immense in this, and his character, the fat man, or Casper Gutman, as he's called.
Just the name Gutman just cracks me up for this.
It's so good. Well, I mean, because look, obviously as well, I mean, essentially, the movie is there's a little bit there about, kind of capitalism and greed. Remember the Depression's like still in, fresh memory. Great wars happened as well not that long ago, and America's trying to rebuild. And so the idea of some sort of, nebulous, you know, his background's not quite clear, super wealthy, obese, you know, epicure who's got the time to kind of pursue this insane goal of getting the Maltese Falcon. You know, there's definitely something there, and you know, quite tellingly, you know, in little moments where it's like they don't just make him a big bad, you know, well, I'll pay you whatever to do whatever, and that type of thing. He has little subtle whimsical moments, almost, as I said, like when he pays Sam Spade $10,000, he pickpockets one and tries to only give him 9. Well, and obviously Sam Spade notices it, and he goes, "Ha yes."
He tries to frame Mary Astor's character as the one who took it. So he's just fucking with everybody, basically.
Yeah,
he's trying to turn them against each other and distract them.
Just for $1,000, which is clearly within the context of his character, utterly
it's implied he's got loads,
yeah, utterly meaningless. And what I like about that is it's almost like an allusion to, you know, was this guy some sort of master pickpocket or something back then? You know, it's just a nice little flourish. You know, I feel like movies don't do this anymore, where you imply something about a character and then just leave it. Let the mind do the work. And you know, as a character, there's so much unsaid about him. And as I said, he almost dominates the screen when he's in a room with Bogart, almost, which is fucking that's a hell of a job in this movie. He's every bit as intellectual, you know, equal.
I actually think as well, the very premise that, like I say, it is this like fantastical but like absurdly valuable item that they're going for allows the movie to work. Like this movie doesn't work if it's just like a box with some gold bars. It doesn't work because one, it not only has to have like the mythological element where you get questioned all over the world for this item, but it's also the notion, which I thought was well played out in the dynamic in the movie, that when you get to that scale of crime, of course, you aren't really going to get the reward if you bring the thing back. The first thing they're going to do, just like the Peter Lorre guy when you give him his gun back, is instantly kill you and take the item. Or if, like, the joke is if they pay you, well, get ready, when you turn around they're going to shoot you, take the money back and have the item. Like, that's actually the whole thing. In fact, the vibe of this movie, as he realizes, everyone's playing for keeps. No one's trying to really just make a little bit. Everyone wants to be the one person who gets the item, and in doing so, they're not only happy to, but it's even their plan to fuck everyone else over. And so the thing I really enjoy actually is there's 2 items I want to bring up. One is this movie highlights why I think one of the most childish readings of history goes like this. Everything was a patriarchy where men had all power and control, and all women could do was wear dresses and sort of go, oh my Lord, and hope everything worked out. That's the most childish reading of history ever, because it even implies you don't know even your own life's dynamics, because women have always had a soft power effect like this in history. Like, this femme fatale fucking runs right over them until right at the end of the movie. She's killing people, having them killed. She's never suspected, by the way, except briefly. And then even then she uses her whiles to get out of it, even with the people who could potentially guess she is embroiled. And it's not until the very end that you find out she is like one of the main core conspirators. She isn't just someone being tossed aside on the wave of emotion and happenstance and what happened to the men in her lives. In fact, actually, by the end, she is the biggest villain of them all. She's the one who killed his fucking partner in a ruthless manner. And then, by the way, tried to embroil him in getting killed next to potentially be like some sort of a fall guy. So I thought, one, that's a good element right there, because that's pretty bold if you think about it for like the era. In this era, all women are just damsels in distress and just like fucking one-dimensional, never could have any dark, sinister side. And then also, what I actually like is this is actually kind of like modern writing. The way Humphrey Bogart wins, or rather doesn't lose in the movie, is he actually understands that because everyone's betraying everyone, and even there is no honor among thieves, he just does like a godlike fucking mind game where he gets them all to like consider betraying each other, and all putting like the way he sets it up so that they're all sort of like fucking up all the relationships, it means that by the end he can actually sort of like defeat them all, basically. That was like a really interesting way to resolve the plot, because it isn't that he just shoots everyone and gets out like the good guy, you know.
It's really clever because he does in the final scene, which is amazing, right, when they're all in Humphrey Bogart's apartment, is him basically, he gets them to understand that they do need a fall guy because the police need to solve these murders. And what he does is he presents it as the most logical thing to kill the muscle, the guy who
also the guy's been fucking with him the whole movie as well, you know. So it's like conveniently it just has to be that guy there. By the way, there is also a really funny scene because they just do it so fast. Like, it's that scene where he gets drugged, like you say, falls down, that guy just walks in, kicks him in the face, and they just leave him with the lights off. Like, what? I thought they were gonna like kill him or something. They just wouldn't say he just does one little boot in his face, then just fucks off, doesn't he?
But what I love about that scene is that he basically convinces them that the muscle, the guy with the guns who has been doing the dirty work, is the one that needs to take the fall. So they knock him out, which means that there's nobody to physically stop Humphrey Bogart at that point in time, because he's taken away the biggest physical threat in the room. And then he slowly, gets the reveal. They get the Falcon. But at the end of the day, what's so fascinating about this is that, and this is a trope of film noir, is like, I guess Humphrey Bogart won, but what did he get? He got nothing. He's exactly where he started at the beginning of the movie. Because does he have the woman? No. He actually just says, you need to take the fall because you killed my partner and you are actually just a horrible human being. And maybe I'll still love you if you get out in 20 years, effectively. But you're going down. And he's just
even dangling that like surely it's over at this point, bro. Just let it go. You know what I mean? Why are you still acting like there's a flame ember of love there? Like, what are we doing here? She's trying to fuck him up 5 times.
Yeah.
He killed.
So he doesn't get the girl, right? He actually just straight up sends the girl to prison. Does he get the money?
Which is chad as fuck, by the way, to be fair. That is chad as fuck. Okay.
Does he get the money? No. In fact, Sidney Greenstreet's character, Gutman, takes back 90% of the money, leaves him with $1,000. He then gives that $1,000 to the cop. So at the end, he has no money. He has not the woman he's been sleeping with, who's been lying to him. And he doesn't have the Falcon. And I guess some people got arrested because at the end of the movie, he sends the cops.
That's why I say he has to do that awkward thing where he's just sort of like, I guess what you're supposed to do when your partner gets killed is solve the crime or whatever. It's just like, it's some shit like that, doesn't he?
So it's bad for all detectives. Like your partner get killed.
I mean, I guess basically he just avoids going to prison when there is reasonable cause to suspect that he was actually one of the murderers in this movie.
Just throw this in, Monty. Even though to a pleb, it will be really unsatisfying when you find out that, yes, it isn't the real Falcon. That is actually one of the best parts of this film, is that there is no... If this was a fucking 80s or 90s Hollywood movie, the end scene is like a post-credit scene where he just smuggled the real one. Like when they always have like the fucking, oh no, the real like MacGuffin was in the, he switched it half with it. They would do that in a modern American movie, like because they'd have to show that it was real. Like the fact that essentially we don't actually know if there ever was the real Maltese Falcon is actually a banger resolution to the movie too.
Well, I mean, we assume there was a real one, but we don't know if it ever survived historically,
exactly. Well,
right?
We can't know if they were ever really searching for it. If it was ever even possible you could get it. Exactly.
Yeah, maybe it was already destroyed, melted down, like you don't know. And I think that, look...
You could even argue, by the way, that ties into what Richard said, the allusion to the idea of like capitalism is sort of like a fool's gold, isn't it? You did all this, you killed all these people, and for what? It wasn't even real at the end.
And the also stuff dreams are made of.
What is it?
The stuff that dreams are made of.
Huh?
Yeah, the stuff
That's
dreams
a great
are made
line
of.
too.
That is a great line.
The only problem with that is this is where stuff like being a genre like Pioneer and or The Simpsons aping everything does ruin everything. Because I always, like me and Richard have had this conversation before. If you go up in the UK and you watch The Simpsons, the problem is before you ever saw these movies, you saw the aped version of it, right? Yeah. So unfortunately, when you hear that line, you almost feel like, that sounds a bit cliche. You know what I mean? Not the first time anyone said it though, but like that, it sounds like the most cliched line ever, doesn't it? Like, what is that? What? No, he goes like, "What's that made of?" And he goes, "The stuff dreams are made of." It's like this is like an outrageous line. Imagine being the cunt who even wrote that and then just put like the end and then just submit it. Like,
no, but literally as well. The end. The last line of dialogue.
How dare you write that line? Even though it is fire, I can't lie. It's straight fire. What an outrageous line, though. What is that made of? The stuff that dream. All right, well, no need to be fucking cheeky. I was just asking what the material was you got.
Look, I kind of agree. I kind of agree with the Ebert review about the style. I think that there are a lot deeper themes in some of the other film noir movies we're going to look at, because ultimately, at the end of the day, the fact that the Falcon isn't real, it really is obviously. The theme is greed here. What will people do for this, magical object? What will people do for wealth? Because at the end, in spite of all this, they kind of just brush it off and say, well, we got to go back to Istanbul to pick up the trail again. And Sidney Greenstreet says, well, I've been looking for this for 17 years, but I guess what's another year of looking for this thing? He then asks Sam Spade to come help them, which is ridiculous given that they've tried to kill him 1,000,000 times at this point.
Like he just says, the guy who's like literally kicked his face off after drugging him. Like, you want to perhaps you'd be interested in coming and filing as file. Like, no, I fucking wouldn't actually, mate. All right.
So it's hilarious that, and he just says, obviously, no, thank you, basically.
Obviously, also, if this was a modern movie, then what would happen is it would end with the Gutman guy turn into the Peter Lorre guy, Joel Cairo. By the way, what outrageous name that is as well, Joel Cairo. Like,
these names are outrageous.
That's like a placeholder name you put in the script and then come up with a real name later. You can't. So when he says to him, obviously in a 90s movie, he'd go, well, in the end, Joel Cairo, I guess the real Falcon was the friends we made along the way. It's almost like that, isn't it? It's almost like that sort of cliche, like, because they almost do, no joke, like you're saying. If it wasn't for the fact there's the scene where Sam says, like, you know, pick him up over here or whatever, the joke is it's almost like they're teasing a sequel, isn't it? Like, and then, you know, fucking the Maltese Falcon 2, Istanbul. You know, like, it's almost like they're trying to tease a sequel with that, like, line. I don't know.
But yeah, at the end of the day, I think thematically this movie is not particularly interesting. We talk a lot about underlying themes. There are not really underlying themes here. The only one is the greed.
This movie basically has the same problem stuff like Citizen Kane does, which is the best parts about it have been copied by a billion other movies since. So they're just not as obvious when you watch it now, years later. You know, like you watch it, you think it's just a normal movie, and it's like you can't understand how mind blowing this would be if you watched it when it, like you said about this is no one even knows who Humphrey Bogart is at this time. Imagine watching this first, be like, what the fuck's this guy? What, this guy was there in Hollywood the whole time. We were just wasted him on side roles.
Yeah.
Because obviously after this, it becomes like one of the most iconic leading men ever.
Also, like we said, John Huston, who's a legendary director.
It's almost just like work fire for him. Yeah, he just started off.
And this movie is shot beautifully, you know, from the classic film noir shadows. And people will think too, you know, this looks, you know, pretty standard film noir.
Exactly.
But if you actually think about, this movie was very groundbreaking in the fact that it did use lighting in a much more aggressive fashion than many other movies, and it set the tone. You know, even the Samuel Spade on the window, like those shadow on the floor, is just so iconic. All of the aesthetic of the movie, you know, showing San Francisco. Again, most film noir movies take place in California, either in San Francisco or Los Angeles. And you get all of the shadows from the blinds and the harsh angles. Like, this really did set the tone in many ways for what would become the visual aesthetic of film noir for 50 years. And so it's easy to overlook some of these things because they became so commonplace. But it really is just a beautiful movie. And the style over substance is totally fine. Like, sometimes you just want a witty, banter-filled dialogue crime, you know, detective movie, and that's fine. It doesn't have to be any deeper than that to be good or entertaining. And I'm glad they kept in the aspects of greed for this film and didn't actually reveal the Falcon, because it's much more impactful that these people did all of this for nothing and may never get the Falcon in the end, because you reflect very seriously on their crimes. But it doesn't have many of the more complex or interesting social commentaries that later films in this genre would have.
Yeah, and you know, look, by design, as I said, this was already, you know, the Warner Brothers studio were a bit leery about, you know, okay, it's our third attempt at adapting this, and we don't want to spend a lot of money on it. But yeah, and it just through, you know, what John Huston was able to do, you know, with a very sort of clear vision. This is why I think the film's great, but is it the best noir movie? No, it's actually not. It's the blueprint. It's what informs the things that come later. And you know, by 1944, you know, when the war's kind of, you know, entering into the, you know, mindset, World War II, entering the mindset of the American people a little bit more. That's when the darkness, the overall sentiment about American society and where it was headed, that's when you really start to get some of the amazing noirs. I mean, like, you know, Double Indemnity, right? That's 44. Gaslight, which is where we get the term to gaslight someone from, that's 44. Laura, that's 44. And so, you know, by the time you get to the middle of the 40s, noir is established as a genre. And everyone is trying to top the Maltese Falcon? How do you beat it? How can I write wittier dialogue? How can I have more iconic performances? How can I have a more convoluted storyline? And interestingly enough, you get a lot of very subversive noir movies. You get noir movies where the protagonist, as I said, he's a piece of shit, but he's kind of a charismatic piece of shit in this. You look at like some of the later, types of protagonists in noir, and it's like it's broken down boxers, it's ex-junkies, convicts, and they're embroiled in shit that's just bigger than them. And so, the Maltese Falcon is like, it's the starting noir for everyone to get into. It's fun. It's fantastical performances. It's a super zippy script. No nonsense. No fat on this movie at all. But the blueprint it lays out, the careers it launched, that's the film's true legacy. I think. I think the reason you have to watch this is to have a true appreciation of all that comes after it. Many of which do eclipse this movie.
Yeah, and I would say that while this is the iconic, film noir movie, if you want, there's tons of other movies within this decade in particular that are pretty good. I low-key love Double Indemnity. If you enjoyed this one, I think Double Indemnity's plot is better than this in many ways. But there's also other classics like The Big Sleep. What we mentioned earlier is another like all-time great film noir movie. But you guys can look on and kind of go down the rabbit hole on this one if you want. But there are many, many, many films cut from this cloth. But this was the first really important one. And I think this was also one of the first movies to showcase like a private eye in film noir. And that became the trope of the genre, basically, for the main character. So, I guess that'll wrap up our conversation. Final thoughts?
Yeah.
Like I say, I'm not a massive fan of this movie, but I agree. It's one that you basically have to see, and crucially, it's sort of like the leg from which you build the table of all the rest of the movies. And if you don't have this one, like Richard said, there's actually the knock-on effect, the butterfly effect years later in other genres would be radical. So I do think it's an important film to watch. The key thing I think is this, like if you're someone who hasn't watched it and you've watched this episode, it's not a movie that's really about like just the raw plot, or as we say, there's almost no action in the movie. It's just like some really good dialogues, and essentially, if you can get into if you can get into the Fat Man character and the Sam Spade character, you will enjoy the battle of wits. I think that's actually pretty well done. So it's quite a unique film in some ways, and in other ways, it is like the archetypal film. I agree with you, though. I think stuff like The Big Sleep's a lot better.
Yeah, and I think as well, like put it this way, I think you'll struggle with this genre if you can't find something to enjoy in this film, because it's all there for you, and it's not complicated. I've heard people try and frame this as like a complicated movie, and it's just like, guys, not at all.
It's not complicated. You just have to wait for the answers.
Yeah, exactly. It's deferred. It's deferred answers. It's hard for a modern audience to understand. But back in the day, you didn't have to have a piece of exposition in the fucking scene. Something was set up explaining why we're setting this up for later. You used to have setup and payoff. It's amazing, right? So if you can't enjoy Bogart's performance, if you can't enjoy Sidney Greenstreet's performance or Peter Lorre's performance, and I sadly we didn't get time to talk about Elijah Cook Jr., who is the Psycho. Fantastic character actor who's been in some amazing movies, including Salem's Lot, Duncan. So, if you can't find someone to enjoy this movie, you're going to struggle this month. But I have to believe that most people could watch The Maltese Falcon and fucking love it for what it is.
Exactly. And also, I will say at the end of this episode that if you are going to watch Touch of Evil, if you are American, you can actually watch it for free on the PBS website. So that's what I found it the other day. So just for you people out there who are looking at it, maybe thinking about like renting it from Amazon, you can, if you are in America with an American IP, watch it for free on PBS, which is great. So that's what I did. And we will come back next week with Orson Welles' Touch of Evil.